My name is Iris Ashford. I'm 31 now. Software engineer, small company founder, the kind of person shows up early and stays late. But when I was 9 years old, my parents drove me to a horse ranch in eastern Oregon and left me on the porch with a plastic suitcase. My grandfather, Henry Ashford, stood in the doorway and watched their car disappear down a gravel road. He didn't wave. Neither did they. 10 years later, those same parents showed up at his funeral in pressed blacks suits, talking about family, talking about fairness, talking about $100 million they believed was rightfully theirs. But here's what none of them knew. Grandpa had already signed everything. And when the lawyer opened that document in front of a room full of witnesses, my mother's face went from entitled to ashen in about 4 seconds flat. I'll get there. But first, let me take you back to the day they left me behind. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people meet loud betrayals and walk out steadier than they came in. If family and money ever taught you a lesson you didn't ask for, this one's going to land. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. It was August. The air smelled like dried grass and hot fence wire, and my sneakers stuck to the vinyl back seat of my father's Buick. 6 hours from Portland, and nobody had said a word to me since the gas station in Bend. My mother Diane sat in the front seat scrolling through a magazine. My father Glenn drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping the armrest like he was counting down the minutes until he could be somewhere else. When we pulled onto the gravel road that led to Ashford Stables, Diane finally turned around. She didn't look at me. She looked past me at the suitcase. "You'll have your own room," she said. "Grandpa's got a big house." That was the pitch. That was the entire explanation for leaving your 9-year-old daughter with a 70-year-old man she'd met twice at Christmas. Glenn set my suitcase on the porch like he was dropping off a package. Diane stayed in the car, engine running, window cracked 2 inches. I looked back at her. She met my eyes for half a second, then said something to Glenn I barely caught through the glass. I heard enough. She was the one we could afford to lose. The Buick backed out. Gravel popped under the tires. The only sound left was the creak of the old windmill behind the barn, turning slow and steady in the August heat. Then the screen door opened. Henry Ashford, 6'1", white hair buzzed short grease under his fingernails. He didn't crouch down to my level. Didn't ask if I was okay. He looked at my suitcase, then at me. "Can you carry that yourself?" I nodded. "Good. Room's at the top of the stairs. Drop it off, then meet me in the workshop." No hug, no cookie, no speech about how everything was going to be all right. Just a direction and a job. The workshop was behind the main barn. Concrete floor, pegboard walls, tools hung by size. It smelled like saddle leather and machine oil, layered deep into the wood, like the building itself was made of work. Henry was holding a bridle with a broken buckle. He pointed to a stool. "Sit." I sat. "Watch." I watched. When he finished, he handed me a rag and said, "You'll work. Working is how you stop drowning." That was my welcome to Ashford Stables. Henry taught me to use a water wrench before he taught me to make scrambled eggs. He said things in short sentences with a second meaning hiding behind the first, and he never pointed to the second meaning. You either caught it or you didn't. By the second month, I was repairing fence posts. By the third, he let me use the welding torch. He never talked about my parents. If I brought them up, he'd redirect. "Hand me the 3/8 socket. Go check the water trough." It wasn't cruelty, it was a decision. He was teaching me that I could build a day without them in it. One evening, I noticed the ring on his right hand. Iron, not gold. Worn smooth on the outside, something etched on the inside I couldn't read. "What's that ring?" He looked at it like he'd forgotten it was there. "My father's." "What's it for?" He turned it once around his finger. "Keeping a promise." Then he picked up his pencil. "You don't inherit a thing, Iris. You earn the right to keep it." I didn't understand what he meant. I would. Henry Ashford had been a mechanical engineer for 32 years. He held 14 patents on irrigation valve systems used across the western United States. The ranch sat on 1,100 acres with water rights dating to 1923. Combined with the patent portfolio, it was worth a figure I wouldn't have believed at 9 years old. Henry drove a 20-year-old Ford truck and bought his clothes at the feed store. Its only sign was the way people in town treated him. Not with deference exactly, but with the quiet respect that goes beyond neighborliness. The man who ate canned soup 3 nights a week was sitting on 100 million in land and intellectual property. And the people who dropped me at his door had always known it. The years passed the way they pass on a working ranch. In seasons, not semesters. I learned to shoe a horse at 12, rebuilt the south fence line at 13. At 14, Henry and I took apart the windmill behind the barn, the same one whose creak had been the last sound I heard the day my parents left, and we rebuilt it from the base plate up. New bearings, new blades, rebalanced rotor. When we finished and the blades caught the first gust, the creak was gone, replaced by a smooth, steady hum. Henry listened to it for a moment. That's the sound of something working the way it's supposed to. My parents called maybe 4 times a year. The calls followed a pattern. Diane asked about insurance and property taxes. She never asked what grade I was in. Glenn got on for 30 seconds. You being good for your grandpa? The kind of question that doesn't want an answer. Then there was my 15th birthday. Diane promised she and Glenn would drive out. We'll bring Brian too, she said. Brian was my older brother, 3 years older, the one they kept. I hadn't seen him since I was 9. I cleaned the guest room. Henry bought a cake from the bakery in town, the most he'd ever done for any occasion. The day came. No car on the gravel road, a voicemail at 6 in the evening. Glenn's meeting ran long. They'd try next month. I sat on the porch with a slice of cake I didn't eat and watched the sun go down behind the barn. Then I heard Henry on the phone inside. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Don't promise that girl something you won't deliver. You do it again, don't call here. He hung up. That was the most I ever heard him say about my parents. I graduated with a 3.9 and a full scholarship to Oregon State for mechanical engineering. Henry drove me to campus in the old Ford, carried one bag to my dorm room, looked around the cinder block walls like he was running a structural assessment. Ceiling's fine. Lets are grounded. You'll be all right. That was his goodbye speech. We walked back to the truck. I hugged him. The first time I'd initiated a hug in 9 years. He was stiff with it. Then he coughed. A deep, wet cough from somewhere in his chest I didn't like. You okay? Dust, he said. Ranch dust. Go learn something. He drove away. The last thing I saw before the Ford disappeared over the hill was the faint glint of that iron ring on his right hand resting on the steering wheel. 2 months in, the phone calls started telling a different story. His voice was thinner every week. By November, I'd stopped pretending it was normal. I came home at winter break and knew immediately. Gates held shut with baling wire. A barn roof leak covered with a tarp. Henry himself had lost 20 pounds he didn't have to spare. I moved back into my old room and started catching up on deferred maintenance. Every time I fixed something, the old rhythm came back. The two of us working side by side, except now I was the one holding the wrench steady while he pointed. One evening I brought him soup and sat on the floor next to his chair. Grandpa, we need to talk about the ranch. No, we don't. If something happens to me, it's handled. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, final, like a bolt torqued to spec. There's a woman named Marion Voss, attorney in Bend. When the time comes, she'll contact you. Everything you need is with her. What does that mean? It means you don't have to worry about it. He reached over and patted the arm of my chair. Henry's version of a long embrace. I set it up years ago. Trust the paperwork. Henry died on a Tuesday in November, 2 days before the first snow. I found him in his recliner, eyes closed, face calm, one hand resting on the arm of the chair. The window was open an inch, and through it came the creak of the windmill. Slow, rhythmic. The same creak I'd heard the day I arrived, except now it sounded different. Now it sounded like a door closing. I sat on the floor next to his chair for a long time. When I finally stood, I reached for his right hand and slid the ring off his finger. It was warm. The inscription inside caught the light. March 14th, 1962, Ashford Keeps. 3 nights before he died, when his voice was barely above a whisper, he'd pressed the ring against my palm and said one thing. Keep it where they can see. I didn't understand yet. I would. The obituary ran Thursday. By Friday morning, Diane called. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. Her last contact had been a voicemail asking Henry about a loan. She hadn't even addressed it to me. Now here she was, voice pitched soft. Iris, sweetheart, we just heard about Daddy. Daddy. She called him Daddy when she wanted something. The funeral's Saturday, I said. We're coming. Glenn and Brian too. A pause. Has anyone talked to you about the estate yet? Not. Are you eating? Not do you need help with the arrangements. The estate. 3 days after his death, before his body was even in the ground. There's an attorney handling things, I said. Her name is Marion Voss. The surprise in her voice was genuine. She'd expected a confused old rancher with a handshake estate and a family that could argue its way to a split. Marion drove out to the ranch Friday morning. Mid-50s, gray-streaked hair, barn jacket over a blouse, dressed for both a law office and a ranch visit. She carried a leather portfolio and a sealed envelope. She showed me the basic structure, a trust, full details to be read formally after the funeral. Then she placed the envelope on the table. He asked me to give you this before the reading. My name in Henry's blocky engineer's handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper torn from a yellow legal pad. 3 sentences. Stay calm. Let them talk. The paperwork already speaks. Henry distilled into 3 lines. The work is already done. Your job is to stand there and let it hold. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket next to the ring. He knew they'd come, Marion said quietly. He planned for it. Of course he did. Henry Ashford built things that held up under pressure. He always had. They arrived Saturday morning in a rented black SUV. Diane in heels entirely wrong for a ranch. Glenn in a suit that didn't quite fit. And Brian, 22, sandy-haired, wearing a pea coat and the expression of someone who'd been told this trip would be short and profitable. I hadn't seen him since I was 9. He looked like a stranger. They didn't come to the door first. They walked the property. Diane pointed at the barn, the pastures, the equipment shed. Glenn had his phone out, tapping, calculating. Brian stood by the paddock fence and looked at the horses the way someone looks at a used car they're considering. They walked the perimeter like buyers at an open house. 20 minutes of appraising my grandfather's life before they knocked on his front door. That evening, after the small talk ran dry, Diane sat across from me at the kitchen table and folded her hands. Her boardroom pose. Iris, we need to talk about your grandfather's estate. There's a formal reading scheduled after the funeral. As family, we should discuss expectations. Glenn leaned against the counter. The land, the horses, the patents. North of $100 million. Your mother is Henry's only surviving child. We have a reasonable expectation of inheritance. Diane put her hand on mine. Manicured nails. Cubic zirconia trying to pass for diamond. This was the hand that hadn't waved goodbye from the Buick. You didn't share me, I said. My voice was level. You left me here for 10 years. You didn't share holidays, birthdays, or phone calls. Why would you share this? Diane pulled her hand back. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Right here is where most people would scream. I didn't. My grandfather taught me the quiet ones win on paper. If you've ever wished you'd stayed calm and let the truth land on its own, you'll want to see what the lawyer pulled out next. Comment if you're Team Iris and subscribe so the ending finds you. Glenn cornered me in the church parking lot after the funeral. He'd loosened his tie. We've retained legal counsel. We have concerns about capacity, about influence. Henry was elderly and isolated, and you were his sole caretaker for the last year. Any attorney would flag that. He said it like he'd memorized it from a legal website, because he had. File whatever you want, I said. There's a formal reading Monday morning. Everyone hears the same thing at the same time. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat in the workshop, Henry's ring on my thumb, breathing in the smell of saddle leather and machine oil, and thought about what my grandfather would do. The answer was obvious. He wouldn't argue in a parking lot. He'd let the system he built do its job. The reading took place Monday morning in the ranch house living room. Henry's choice. High ceiling, wood-paneled walls, windows facing the east pastures, 6 chairs in a semicircle. Dale and Pete, Henry's ranch hands of over a decade. Frank Bolio, Henry's oldest friend, a retired large animal vet. Marion at the small table with her portfolio. At 9:15, the front door opened. Diane in a charcoal suit, expression of composed entitlement. Glenn adjusting his cuffs. A man I didn't recognize in a sharp suit with a leather briefcase. Their attorney, Brian last, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The room was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock, and if you listen closely, the faint creak of the windmill outside. Marion read slowly, clearly. The way you read something built to be heard. The Henry Ashford Revocable Living Trust, dated January 12, 2006, amended July 2013, hereby irrevocable upon the death of the settlor, provides as follows. Standard preamble. Trustee designations. Then she reached the distributions. All trust assets, including the real property known as Ashford Stables, comprising 1,142 acres in Harney County, Oregon. All water rights pertinent thereto, the personal property located thereon, and the full portfolio of 14 United States patents, together valued at approximately $114 million, are distributed solely and irrevocably to the following beneficiary. She paused. Iris May Ashford. Every pair of eyes in the room landed on me. Diane's head turned. Glenn's mouth opened. Brian sat back like he'd been shoved. The settler further directs that the following individuals are intentionally excluded from any distribution under this trust, and that this exclusion is not an oversight, but a deliberate decision made with full knowledge and sound judgment. She read the names. Diane Marie Mercer, Glenn Robert Mercer, Brian Allen Mercer, then the stated reasons. One sentence each, drafted in Henry's dry, precise language. For Diane, my daughter abandoned her minor child in my care in August 2007 and made no meaningful effort to parent, visit, or support said child in the years following. For Glenn, he participated in and facilitated the abandonment described above. For Brian, Henry had been gentler. Brian bears no personal fault but was not raised in connection with this property or its values, and is provided for separately below. Diane's face was the color of paper. Marion continued, a no contest clause. Any excluded party who contests the trust forfeits the token distributions in Schedule B. Schedule B provided a one-time payment of $5,000 to each excluded party, contingent on non-contest. A challenge eliminates even that. Glenn's attorney put down his pen. Then the real architecture. The settler's testamentary capacity is attested by a cognitive evaluation performed by Dr. Rebecca Stahl, licensed psychiatrist, dated January 2006 at trust formation. A second evaluation by Stahl dated April 2013, 18 months prior to death, and witnessed attestations by 2 independent attorneys present at the signing and amendment. 3 independent professionals. 2 evaluations over 7 years. 2 outside attorneys with no stake in the outcome. Glenn's diminished capacity argument was dead. Diane's undue influence narrative was dead. They had come to this room with assumptions and entitlement and a hired attorney, and they had run into 8 years of meticulous planning by a man who built irrigation systems that lasted 40 years. The silence lasted about 8 seconds. Then Diane stood up. Her chair scraped against the hardwood, sharp and ugly. This is insane. Her voice was high and thin, the performance tone gone. This was the real Diane. He can't leave everything to her. We gave her to him because we didn't have a choice. You had a choice, Dale said from his chair, quietly. The way ranch people say things that aren't up for debate. Diane turned to me, eyes wet, jaw tight. And then it came. The sentence that had been living in her chest for 10 years. You were the one we could afford to lose. The room went still. Not quiet, still. Dale closed his eyes. Pete looked at the floor. Frank Bolio shook his head slowly. I sat to my chair by the window with Henry's ring on my thumb. The same sentence I'd heard through a car window at 9 years old, now spoken again in front of witnesses who would never forget it. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. He already said no in writing. The room exhaled. Marion nodded and continued. There is one additional personal provision I'm directed to read. She turned to the final page. To my granddaughter Iris, to whom I gave my father's ring on the night of November 11th. This ring bearing the inscription Ashford Keeps and the date March 14, 1962, is both a personal inheritance and a confirmation of intent. I gave it to Iris because she is the person who stayed, who worked, and who earned the right to carry this name. Let the presence of this ring on her hand stand as testament that my wishes were communicated directly, personally, and without coercion. I was of sound mind. I was not influenced. I was proud. Marion looked up. I was holding my right hand steady on the arm of the chair, the ring visible. March 14th, 1962. Ashford Keeps. That's what keep it where they can see meant. Not a display, a receipt. Proof of delivery. Engineer style. Documented, witnessed, specific. Glenn's attorney was packing his briefcase. There was no angle. Henry had sealed every seam. A contest would trigger the no contest clause. A capacity challenge would collide with 2 psychiatric evaluations and 2 independent attorney attestations. An undue influence claim would require proving that I, a college student living 3 hours away, had somehow controlled a man whose own doctor had certified his sharp cognitive function 18 months prior. They never filed. Glenn's attorney sent one letter to Marion 2 weeks later, a half-hearted inquiry about mediation. Marion responded with a 3-line summary of the no contest clause and a polite invitation to proceed through the courts if they wished. The letter was never answered. The $5,000 token payment sat uncollected for the statutory period and reverted to the trust. I didn't sell the ranch. Henry hadn't asked me to, and even if he had, I wouldn't have. Dale and Pete stayed on. I finished my engineering degree remotely, launched my company from the workshop where Henry had taught me to solder, and filed 3 more patents in the first 2 years. But the thing I'm proudest of isn't the company. 18 months after the reading, I established the Henry Ashford Hope Foundation. It provides trade apprenticeships, housing support, and mentorship for young people aging out of the foster care system. The ranch hosts a summer program every July, 8 kids, 6 weeks. Hands-on work with horses, welding, basic engineering. The same curriculum Henry gave me, minus the abandonment. The workshop still smells like saddle leather and machine oil. The windmill still turns. And every kid who walks through the door of that barn gets the same first instruction I got 22 years ago. Not a speech about resilience, not a pamphlet on self-esteem. A wrench, a stool, and a voice in my memory saying, "You'll work. Working is how you stop drowning." My grandfather never gave me a thing. He taught me how to earn the right to keep it. And then he taught me the hardest part, how to hand it on. That's the only inheritance that ever mattered. That's my story. A suitcase at 9, a ring at 19, and a name I earned the right to keep. If someone raised you when they didn't have to, tell them today. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.